The morning Thad Calloway walked back into a hospital he hadn't set foot in for 11 years, he was not prepared for what he would find. He had taken the red-eye from Seattle, killed 4 hours in a rental car that smelled like someone else's cigarettes, and arrived at Mercy General before the breakfast carts had even started rolling. His meeting with the hospital's board wasn't until 10. He had time, too much of it. He told himself he was early because of traffic he hadn't expected to miss. He told himself he walked through the main lobby out of habit, not memory. He told himself a lot of things on the way up those front steps, and none of them were entirely true. It had been 11 years since Thad Calloway had worked here as a surgical resident, 26 years old, and convinced that long hours and iron will could substitute for sleep. 11 years since he had fallen in love in the break room of the 3rd floor over terrible vending machine, coffee, and a cardiology textbook. 11 years since he had made the worst decision of his life without fully understanding, at the time, that that's what it was. The lobby was quiet. A few nurses crossed toward the elevator bank. An orderly pushed an empty wheelchair near the gift shop. Then, near the far wall where the volunteer information desk sat, a woman in pale blue scrubs was helping an elderly man navigate a folded map of the hospital's wings. Thad stopped walking. He knew her before he could explain how. The set of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head when she was focused, the small unconscious gesture of tucking a strand of hair behind one ear, even though it was already pinned up. Sarah Whitlow. She was pointing at something on the map, speaking slowly, and the old man was nodding with visible relief. She had always been that way, patient in a way that looked effortless even when it cost her something. Thad stood in the middle of the lobby like a man who had walked into a room and forgotten every word he knew. He was 41 years old, head of a medical technology company with offices in 4 cities, the kind of man who presented to rooms full of people without his pulse rising once. And he could not take a single step. Sarah straightened up, handed the man the map, and said something that made him laugh. Then she turned. She saw him. For a moment neither of them moved. Her expression went through something he couldn't name. Recognition, then something more complicated, then a careful evenness that she had clearly practiced. "Thad," she said. Her voice was the same, lower than most people expected, steadier than the situation warranted. "Sarah." He crossed the lobby slowly, unsure what his face was doing. "I didn't know you were still here." 11 years, she said, the words landing with a weight she hadn't quite made neutral. "People change jobs. They do." He paused. "You didn't." She tilted her head slightly. "Administration. I'm not in the OR anymore." A beat. "You're here for the board meeting?" He nodded. Of course she would know. Small hospital, small world board involvement. He should have anticipated this. He hadn't. 10 o'clock, he said. "I know." She glanced at the clock on the far wall. "You're early, force of habit." She looked at him for another moment, something moving behind her eyes that she didn't let reach her face. And then she said, in exactly the tone of a person who has rehearsed what to say if this day ever came. She picked up the folder she'd set on the desk and walked toward the east corridor without looking back. Thad watched her go. He had told himself over 11 years that he had made peace with it. With all of it. He had told himself that with enough distance, enough work, enough forward motion, the past becomes something that happened to a younger version of yourself. Someone you remember but no longer are. He had believed it, more or less. Standing in that lobby, watching Sarah Whitlow disappear around a corner, he understood that he hadn't believed it at all. He had only stopped looking directly at it. The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Thad sat at the head of a conference table and spoke about his company's new monitoring system with exactly the focus and clarity people had come to expect from him. He answered questions. He walked through the data. He was, by every visible measure, completely present. In the margins of his notepad, he wrote nothing. He did not write her name. He was not 26 anymore. But when the meeting adjourned and people filtered out in 2s and 3s, Thad found himself taking the long way to the parking garage, the route that wound past the 3rd floor break room, where the vending machine used to hum and shake when it delivered anything cold. He didn't know why, exactly. He just walked. The break room was smaller than he remembered, or he was larger, or both. New furniture, same window. He stood there for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, and then a voice behind him said, "The coffee's better now, if that helps." He turned. Sarah stood in the doorway, a mug in each hand, and something in her expression had softened from what he'd seen downstairs. Not much, but enough. "It doesn't take much to clear the bar," he said. She made a short sound that was almost a laugh and came into the room. She set one mug on the table and didn't invite him to take it, but she didn't move it away either. He sat down. She sat across from him. For a moment they were quiet. "How long are you in town?" she asked. "A few days. The board wants a follow-up Thursday." She nodded, turning the mug slowly in both hands. "Sarah." He said her name carefully, like something he'd been carrying. "I owe you an explanation, a real one. Not the version I told myself." She looked at him steadily. "It was 11 years ago." "It was," he said. "And I've had 11 years to understand what I actually did, which is different from what I told myself I did at the time." He paused. "I left because my father told me the partnership in Portland was conditional. On me. Being unattached." Those were his words. He watched her face. "You were a resident making $40,000 a year. I was 29 and terrified of losing the only future I could see clearly. And I chose wrong. And I didn't even have the honesty to say any of that to you. I just stopped calling." The room was very quiet. "You sent a text," Sarah said. "I know." "One text. After 4 years, I know." He didn't look away. "There is no version of that story where I was a good person. I'm not asking you to say otherwise. I just needed you to know that I know." Sarah looked at the window for a long moment. When she turned back, her expression was different, not warmer, exactly, but more honest, less defended. "I have a daughter," she said. "Her name is Ivy. She's 7. Something shifted in his chest, quiet and complicated. "She's mine?" he asked. He kept his voice level, not because he felt level, but because she deserved a level voice. Sarah met his eyes. "No," she said. "She's not. Her father was someone I met 3 years after you left. We were married for 2 years." She wrapped both hands around the mug. "He left when Ivy was 18 months old. Said fatherhood wasn't what he'd expected." She said it without bitterness, which told him the bitterness had already burned through and left something harder and quieter behind. "So, it's been the two of us. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry about something you didn't do." "I'm sorry it happened," he said. "That's different." She looked at him for a moment, then nodded once, accepting the distinction. He left the hospital that afternoon without asking for anything. He had not come here for a second chance. He had come for a board meeting and had stumbled unexpectedly into the one conversation he had been not having for 11 years. That was enough, more than enough. He was in his rental car on the way back to the hotel when his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. At the next red light, he played it back. A child's voice. High, serious, businesslike. "Hello, this is Ivy. My mom said you might remember her from a long time ago. She also said I'm not supposed to call strangers, but she was in the kitchen and I used her phone. She left your card on the counter. I just wanted to say hi because she looked sad after she came home and I don't like when she's sad." "Okay. Bye." Thad sat at the green light until the car behind him honked. He called back. Sarah answered immediately, her voice already mortified. "I'm so sorry," she said. She got into my bag. I don't know how she even." "She said she called because you seemed sad." A pause. 7-year-olds notice things," Sarah said finally quietly. "Yeah," he said, "they do." There was a silence, but a different kind than before. "We were about to have dinner," Sarah said. "If you haven't eaten." He had not eaten since the granola bar he'd choked down at the airport at 6 in the morning. He thought about saying that he didn't want to impose, that it had already been a strange day, that the reasonable thing was to get takeout at the hotel and review his Thursday materials like an adult. "Text me the address," he said. Ivy Whitlow was, in fact, businesslike in person as well. She was 7 years old, dark-haired, and wearing a shirt that said Future Scientist across the front. She opened the door before Sarah could get there, looked Thad up and down with frank assessment, and said, "You're taller than I thought. Did you bring anything?" "Ivy," Sarah said, appearing behind her. "What?" "It's a normal question. It's genuinely fine," Thad said. He held up the paper bakery bag he'd stopped for on the way. "Blueberry muffins. I didn't know what you liked." Ivy considered this. "Blueberries are my second favorite. Lemon is first. Noted for next time." She processed the implication of next time with visible interest, then stood aside to let him in. The apartment was small and warm and thoroughly lived in, the kind of space that told you everything about the person who kept it. Ivy's drawings were taped to the refrigerator at a height that suggested she had done it herself. A stack of medical journals sat on the coffee table next to a library book about ocean animals. The kitchen smelled like garlic and something tomato-based, and Thad felt something unknot in his chest that he hadn't realized was knotted. Sarah moved around the kitchen with the same focused efficiency he remembered, and dinner was easy in a way he hadn't expected. Ivy interrogated him with the thoroughness of a congressional hearing. What does your company do exactly? How many people work for you? Do you have any pets? Why not? Is it because you travel too much? That's what her mom said about why they couldn't get a dog, and Thad answered every question straight, which Ivy seemed to appreciate more than Charm would have. Sarah was quieter, watching the two of them from across the table with an expression he couldn't entirely read. After dinner, Ivy was persuaded upstairs to get ready for bed on the condition that Thad would come say goodnight, which she presented not as a request but as a scheduling matter. When she disappeared up the stairs, the kitchen got quieter. She doesn't take to people easily, Sarah said, carrying plates to the sink. She was very thorough in her assessment. She's been doing that since she was 4, interviewing everyone who comes to the door. Sarah turned on the water. Delivery drivers, her teacher at school pickup. My mother, she wants to know if people are who they say they are. Smart, Thad said. Exhausting, Sarah said. But she was almost smiling. He dried the dishes she handed him, and for a while they didn't talk, and it was fine. The way silence between people who have known each other can sometimes be, even after a long time, even after damage. She asked me once, Sarah said, without looking up from the sink, why her dad stopped coming. She was 3, barely 3, and she asked me in the car one morning, where's Dad? Did he stop wanting to come? Her voice was steady. I didn't have an answer that made sense at 3 years old. I still don't have one that makes full sense at 7. Thad set down the dish he was holding. What do you tell her? That sometimes people leave not because of the people they leave behind. That it's about the lever, not the left. She paused. She's still working out if she believes that. She's not the only one. Sarah looked at him then, a real look, the kind that costs something. I believed it about you, she said quietly, eventually. It took a few years, but I got there. He didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that wasn't inadequate. Upstairs, a small voice called, I'm ready. Ivy's was in bed with a book propped on her knees and a stuffed octopus under one arm. She explained, with great seriousness, that the octopus was named Gerald, and that Gerald had been with her since she was 2 and was not, as it might appear, babyish. Gerald seems like a solid choice, Thad said. He is, Ivy confirmed. She looked at him. Are you going to come back? Ivy, Sarah said from the doorway. It's relevant, Ivy said. It's okay, Thad said. He looked at Ivy directly, the same way he'd learned she preferred to be looked at. Yes, if that's okay with you and your mom. Ivy considered this with the gravity it deserved. Okay, she said. You can come back. He drove back to the hotel with the windows down despite the cold. Because he needed air, and he needed to think, and he needed to remember what it felt like to be the kind of person who was allowed to want things. He came back Thursday, after the board meeting. And then again Saturday when Sarah mentioned that Ivy had a school thing and it was going to run long. He brought lunch. He sat in a gymnasium folding chair for an hour, watching second graders demonstrate science experiments with focused ineptitude, and Ivy presented on why dolphins are technically smarter than most people think. And when she made eye contact with him from the front of the room, she gave him one firm nod, the kind that said, good, you stayed. He stayed. He extended his trip by 4 days. He told his assistant it was because of the follow-up materials the board requested, which was partially true. What was also true was that he was learning what Sarah liked for breakfast. Black coffee, something with eggs, nothing sweet before noon, that Ivy pronounced particularly as partika larli and was very confident about it. That the apartment got cold at night because the radiator in the living room was unreliable, and that Sarah always put an extra blanket on the couch without being asked, because she noticed things like that. He was learning them back. That was what it was. One evening, after Ivy was asleep, he and Sarah were sitting at the kitchen table with the last of a bottle of wine she'd opened, and he noticed she kept checking her phone, a specific kind of checking. Not casual, not bored. The kind that meant she was waiting for something she didn't want to receive. What's going on? He asked. She set the phone face down. Nothing. He waited. She looked at the table. Ivy's father has been reaching out after 4 years. He found out through mutual friends that things might be more stable now. That there's someone, she said the word carefully, who might be spending time with us. Thad was very still. He's not asking to see Ivy because he misses her, Sarah said. He's asking because he's decided his version of her life needs to look a certain way, and this doesn't fit it. She picked up the phone, set it down again. The messages started friendly. The last 2 weren't. What did the last 2 say? She turned the phone over and slid it across the table. He read them. His jaw tightened. The first was a reminder that he had parental rights regardless of his absence. The second was an implication barely veiled that if Sarah was cohabitating with a man, his word, there were things a family court judge might want to evaluate. Thad put the phone down, face up, and looked at it for a moment. "Has he been consistent in his absence?" he asked, his voice controlled, the way he'd learned to make it in situations that required him to think rather than react. 4 years, she said. 2 birthday cards in 4 years, both late. No financial support after the first 3 months. She rubbed the edge of her thumb along the rim of her wine glass. "I have documentation. I've kept everything, every missed exchange, every ignored message. Because Ivy's pediatrician told me early on, document everything, just in case." A short, tired laugh. "I thought she was being dramatic." "She wasn't," Thad said. "No." He picked up his own phone and dialed. Sarah looked at him. "It's after 9, she said. "He works late," Thad said into the phone. "Miles, it's Thad. I need a family attorney referral. Best you know. Tonight if possible. Referral call tomorrow morning." He listened. "I know what time it is. Thank you." He hung up. Sarah was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely catalog, something between stunned and something more careful. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know. This isn't your problem. I know that too." She was quiet for a moment. "Thad, I'm not doing it because I think I owe you something from 11 years ago," he said, which was true, or partly true. The rest was harder to articulate. "I'm doing it because you're not doing this alone anymore. If that's all right with you." Sarah looked at him for a long time. Her eyes were very bright. "It's all right with me," she said quietly. The attorney, her name was Catherine Wolfe, was sharp and fast and did not waste words. She reviewed the documentation Sarah had assembled, all of it, 4 years of careful records, and she was direct. The case for consistent abandonment was strong. The sudden reappearance with veiled legal threats, following news of a stable living situation, would look exactly like what it was to any judge who had seen the pattern before. It was not a short process. Nothing like that ever is. There were filings and delays and one phone call from the other party's attorney that was specifically designed to frighten Sarah, and didn't, because Catherine was there to explain what each word actually meant. Thad flew back to Seattle when he had to. He flew back to Columbus when he could. He called every night at 8 because Ivy had decided 8 o'clock was the correct time for a check-in call, and she was not flexible about scheduling. He talked to Ivy about dolphins and her science fair project and whether a CEO was basically the same as a president, which she had decided it was. He talked to Sarah after Ivy went to bed, sometimes for 20 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours, about everything and nothing, about what had happened 11 years ago and what they were both still figuring out. "I spent a long time," Sarah told him one night, her voice low, Ivy already asleep, "not trusting any version of safe that had a person in it. I got very good at making things work, just the two of us." "You did," he said. "It's harder to let that go than I thought it would be. Even when I want to." She paused. "Even when it's you." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to go fast. What are you asking me?" He was quiet for a moment. "To let me stay in the frame, that's all. However long it takes." He heard her breathe. "Okay," she said, "that I can do." 4 months later, Catherine called with the decision. Sarah was in the hospital parking lot after a 12-hour shift, still in her coat, and she called Thad before she'd even gotten to her car. "Full custody," she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. "Supervised visitation only if he petitions and demonstrates sustained effort. Catherine says it's about as clean as it gets." Thad was in a meeting. He stepped out without a word to anyone. "Sarah." His voice was thick. "She's safe," Sarah said. "Ivy's safe. We're okay." He was on a plane 2 days later. He did not tell her he was coming. He only texted when he was in the cab from the airport. She was at the door when he pulled up, still in the clothes she'd clearly worn all day. No makeup, her hair in the same practical arrangement she always wore for work. Ivy appeared at her elbow, looked at the cab, looked at Thad getting out, and then announced to no one in particular, "I knew he was coming." He hugged them both. Ivy first because she was already moving forward, and then Sarah, and she held on for longer than she usually let herself, her face against his shoulder, and he didn't say anything at all. That evening, after dinner, Ivy had requested pancakes, because celebrations required pancakes, and she was extremely clear on this point. They sat on the front porch while Ivy chased fireflies in the small yard below. The summer air was warm and thick, and smelled like cut grass from someone's lawn down the street. "I used to think," Sarah said, watching Ivy sprint across the yard with both hands cupped, That things coming back together was just something that happened in movies, that in real life, what's broken stays broken in the shape that it broke. Thad looked at her. "I think I was wrong," she said, simply. She glanced at him, and something in her face had let go of a something she'd been holding for a very long time. He took her hand. She didn't move it away. Below them, Ivy held her cupped hands up to the light from the porch window and peered inside at whatever she'd caught. Then she looked up. "I got one," she announced. "I see that," Thad said. "She's okay," Ivy reported, checking. "I'm going to let her go." And she opened her hands, and something small and lit blinked once, twice, and then lifted into the dark, and Ivy watched it go with the particular satisfaction of someone who had held something carefully and set it free without damage. Thad watched her and he thought, that's exactly it. That's the whole of it. He didn't let go of Sarah's hand. 6 months after that, on a Saturday in January, when the yard was covered in 2 inches of snow, and Ivy was inside building an elaborate and structurally questionable fort in the living room, Thad asked Sarah to marry him at the kitchen table over coffee. Quietly, without a speech. Just the words, honest and plain. She said yes before he'd entirely finished asking. Inside, Ivy appeared in the kitchen doorway as if she'd been waiting, which, knowing Ivy, she possibly had, and assessed the situation in about 3 seconds. She looked at Sarah, she looked at Thad, she looked at the ring. Finally, she said, went back to her fort. Sarah laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from all the way down, and leaned her forehead against Thad's shoulder, and he pressed his cheek against her hair, and outside the snow kept falling, soft and even, covering everything in white, the way the world sometimes does when it's giving you a clean page and saying, "Here, start here, it's safe to begin."